1. This happened in 1999, and though I am from Virginia State, this happened many miles from my hometown, and was out close to the mountains in central Virginia. My friend, whom I will call Tay, and I had gone on a little road trip to see some caverns. At 19, it was the first time either of our parents had let us drive so far from home by ourselves. It was also still a little earlier than Google Maps, Siri, or Alexa, so we were relying on old-school maps. There had been a few rest areas marked on the map that we'd already missed, and Tay had to pee. Finally, we spotted the welcome sight of a rest area 2 miles sign. As we pull in, it was around 10 p.m., and there were a few cars in the parking lot. We hopped out of the van and headed in to take care of business and get some sodas and snacks from the vending machines, as we still had another 25 minutes of riding before the time we were going to get a hotel room for the night in. As we were being indecisive at the vending machines, we soon noticed the cars and people we'd seen around had all left. There were a few tractor trailers humming off to the side, from what we remember, but they were far enough off to the side of the back parking lot that they'd have never heard us scream if we'd had to. Then we see an older navy blue Chevy come sliding in through the entrance. First, it's a semi-relief, but as Tay is waiting for her soda to drop, I am watching the truck. It parks right up next to our van, ignoring 45 other parking spaces. I still downplay that to someone thinking safety in numbers or something, even though back then women tried not to park next to vans in dark parking lots. But this truck had pulled up on the passenger side of our van, and as we were walking towards the van, they still haven't got out. Tay says something along the lines of, "What are they up to?" And she was the one driving, so it was I who had to go squeeze between this Chevy truck and my passenger van door. And they hadn't left a lot of room. I almost told Tay I'm not going to do it as I rounded the back of the van and squeezed through, quickly jumping in and slamming my door as if they'd grab me. Just as we lock our doors and I turn to put my seatbelt on, there is a man who has hopped out of his Chevy and is standing in the little space, knocking on my rolled-up window. I let out a squeal and literally locked the door in his face. He reminded me of that comedian Gallagher, who used to smash watermelons, only he was wearing a dirty baseball cap. He says something along the lines of, "Sorry to scare you," and starts rambling on. Tay cracks my window a bit so we can hear, and he says, "I'm lost. We're not from here," I say. So we couldn't be much help. "Do you know if we're already past Petersburg?" he asks, ignoring my original cop-out answer. Tay and I glance at each other because Petersburg is at least 80 or more miles in another direction. So I say, "I don't know, sir. Again, we're not from here. Good luck, though. There is a large map inside that may help." Again, ignoring me, he suddenly reaches up and slides his fingers under the crack in my window, and then starts yanking as if he's trying to break the glass. In fact, I don't know how it didn't give, as Tay starts wrestling with getting her keys from her lap to the ignition. We're both panicking and yelling "stop," when suddenly he does, just as Tay is turning over the ignition, and he says in a very low, growly voice, "I've drank blood fresher than yours anyway," and gives one more good yank as Tay is backing out of the parking lot, with his fingers still in the window, as I am simultaneously trying to roll up my window. He did not follow us as we fled back towards the interstate, and we didn't inform the police or our parents, because we didn't want to hear any stranger danger I told you so's. But creepy vampire Gallagher, let's not meet. 2. After my wife and I had been dating for a year or so, we decided to get an apartment, even though we were both very young. She was 17 and I was 18, but of course we were both incredibly excited about our first apartment and getting away from our parents. The neighborhood was fairly nice, and our neighbors were all relatively young and friendly people, mostly college students and young couples like us. We lived in that apartment for a little over a year without incident, until one afternoon when we decided to go kill time at a mall that was very near to our apartment complex. A mutual friend of ours had a son with a birthday right around the corner, so my wife thought it would be a nice idea to buy him one of those large Super Soaker-style water guns. When we got back from the mall, we went straight to our bedroom and laid down to have a cigarette. Somewhere along the line, my wife grabbed the water gun from the floor and in a playful way said, "You know what? I'm going to go fill this up in the bathroom and shoot you with it." I just laughed and said, "Don't pick that fight, you'll regret it." After a couple minutes, she grabbed the gun and made a beeline towards the kitchen to fill up the gun, and I went into our bathroom, which was right across the hall from our bedroom. I'm not sure what my plan was, but I'm sure it involved retaliation by water with whatever I could find. I grabbed a cup and started to fill it up in the bathroom sink when I heard my wife scream my name. It was loud and she sounded terrified, as if she needed me to come to her right away. I ran down the hall and she was standing there at the entrance to our main room, where two people who we had never seen before were now also standing. Our front door wide open behind them with the keys hanging from the lock. I'd left them there. One was an elderly woman, maybe in her 60s, and with her was a young girl, possibly around 15 or 16 years old. Both were wearing black dresses and the youngest looked really pale. I stood in front of my wife and asked in a somewhat assertive tone, "Can I help you?" At that, the older woman took a few steps in my direction, and as if she were holding an invisible rifle, she said in a stern voice, "I'm going to take this, and I'm going to shoot you with it." Then she looked once at my wife, then again at me and asked, "Do you always let her speak to you that way?" We both just stood there silently staring at the pair of them. I don't remember being too scared, just generally confused. After a moment, the younger girl slowly started to reach for a necklace I was wearing and said in a really monotone and quiet voice, "I like your necklace. It's pretty." I snapped at her a bit and said, "Please don't touch me. Listen, I need both of you to leave, please, now." They just stood there staring at both of us for what seemed like a year. Then I started to move toward the older woman with my arm extended, as if I were going to push her out the front door, and no sooner than I took the first step in her direction, she began mocking what I said before. "I need you to leave, I need you to leave." At this point, she had a very aggressive look on her face, but was backing up toward the door nonetheless. Finally, they were out in the main hallway, and I snatched the keys from the lock and shut the door, bolting it. I looked at the woman through the peephole, and she stood there, looking right back at me, gesturing at me with her invisible gun and yelling, "Shoot me? I'd never let some girl talk to me that way." At this point I had chills and my wife just kept asking, "Are they leaving?" They finally left the main hallway area and began to linger out front for a bit, until finally they began to walk up the main road. We sat at our window watching them walk away until they were finally out of sight. I'd never forget that woman's face, which I would regret something like 8 to 10 months later. I'd gotten a job as a waiter in a Mexican restaurant, and I'd often go to the front of the store to see what the crowd looked like and get a sense of how many tables I had coming up from the hostesses. That's when I saw her again. I'm 100% sure it was her. There's absolutely no way I would ever forget that face staring at me through that peephole and yelling those crazy things. The thing is, she was acting completely normal. She was wearing a nice clean red sweater with a white shirt beneath and blue jeans. This time, rather than being with this bizarre-looking younger girl, she had an older gentleman with her. They were waiting for a table, and I got as close as I could to try and listen to the nature of their conversation. They were talking about some cruise they had been planning on attending. It all sounded very normal. This was the same woman who had been standing in my apartment, and it took every ounce of restraint I had not to confront her there in the lobby of that restaurant. And I'm still not entirely certain why I didn't. I mean, I know this was the same woman, but I'm not sure she did. She had changed in some way. That's what I know, but I couldn't tell you exactly how. 3. These encounters happened a few months ago and left me feeling so shaken. Here are some details just for background information. I briefly worked for a locally owned retail business that has 4 locations in the city I was living in. Most of the employees rotate between the 4 locations, and I was usually scheduled at the same one for most of my week, but would sporadically work at the other locations. 2 of the stores are located inside of buildings that contain shopping centers for other retailers and restaurants. These are the 2 stores that I had been working at during this experience. So, it was mid-September, and I had about an hour left of my Saturday shift when a man came in. bought some things and started conversing with me. I learned that he was a manager at another store within the same shopping center. He didn't seem threatening or creepy in any way, but he was a bit older than me. I will call him Joe. He visited a couple of times over the next few weeks, and then one evening, after talking for a few minutes, he asked if I wanted to smoke a blunt with him after my shift. I told him I had plans to attend a party that night, and I didn't see anything wrong with smoking with him. So I agreed. After I closed the store, we met up, walked away from the building and smoked a blunt. He asked if I wanted to grab a quick drink and I agreed, but said just one, because I did have other plans. We got a drink. Then he used my phone to send a text message to himself so he would have my number. He seemed harmless enough, so I was okay with it. I thanked him for the drink and departed, not thinking much of it. I had been careful about how much personal information I gave him. No full name, no description of where I lived, just that I lived in the south side of the city. For the next couple of Saturdays he would stop in, buy something small, and say hello when I was there. I didn't find this odd at all because he worked in the same building, and I work in the same shop every Saturday. He would get a little too comfortable sitting by the counter, which made me a little uneasy sometimes, but he was never intimidating. If anything, he was just a bit annoying because he tried so hard to seem cool, telling me all about his wild partying lifestyle. I also found it odd when I found out that he had friend requested me on Facebook. Maybe he looked it up with my phone number, but it still made me feel like he had invaded my privacy. Now fast forward a couple of weeks later. It was Saturday and I was working at a different location than usual. This store was located in a small shopping center, but not the one I usually worked at on Saturdays. I was finishing up checking out a customer when someone else walked in the store and out of view behind a shelf. The first customer walked out and guess who came walking over to the counter? It was Joe. I said, "Wow, what are you doing here?" Not in an unfriendly tone, but like, what was he doing here? This led to the first encounter that made me genuinely uncomfortable. He ignored my question and parked himself nearly behind the counter as if he worked here. This made me very uncomfortable because he was basically blocking me in behind the counter. To get out from behind the counter, I'd have to squeeze between him and a display case. He seemed to be playing dumb and saying things like, "Wow, I didn't even know you guys had a store in here." Which I just know was bullshit because he didn't work anywhere near this building. And I knew he wasn't just wandering around the city like, wonder what stores are in here. He asked how my week was and I told him with as little detail as possible that I had been having a fun week going out with friends. He asked if I wanted to smoke again after this shift and I said no thank you, I had things to do. Then he was asking what other kinds of drugs I was into, and started to tell me about his wild night with his crazy friends. I was extremely uninterested, but he didn't pick up on it and just kept going. I started to get more uncomfortable, and thought about asking him to leave, but I didn't want to be rude, since he hadn't really done anything threatening. I think he had planned this all out strategically. He had spent so much time trying to gain my trust in a way. He never acted predatory or out of line so that I would become more comfortable around him, and allow him to get away with more creepy behaviors without saying anything. This is where it started to get weird. Again, he asked if I wanted to get high, and I reiterated that I didn't want to smoke, because I had stuff to do later. He started asking if I liked uppers, if I'd ever tried speed. I haven't. Then admitted he hadn't slept and was still high on speed from the night before. This put me so on edge I didn't really know how to react. My anxiety was spiking and I was starting to feel very panicky. He hinted again at the idea of us getting high together, and I was like, "Okay, what are you talking about?" I told you I don't want to smoke, and he clarified that he wanted me to do speed with him. But if I did want to do it, I'd have to hang out for at least half an hour. At this point I was so extremely uncomfortable I didn't know what to say. I was freezing up, hoping he would just go away. And for the record, I did not know until after this encounter that speed was slang for meth. Otherwise I would have told him to get the fuck out at that point. I told him I had never done speed and didn't intend to. He reluctantly accepted it but didn't leave. He asked if there was an office in the back of the store, if there were cameras. There were. I pointed them out to him, and if we could go do speed in the office. Again, I declined his offer, and wished that he would leave. Finally, he decided to go, and said he would see me later. After he left, I was basically panicking, because I kept realizing how fucking weird the whole thing was. How did he know where I was working that day? Maybe he went into my usual location and asked why I wasn't working there that Saturday. I asked a friend to meet me after my shift so I wouldn't have to leave alone and encounter him again. Thank God he didn't come back, but it made me so nervous I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder as I closed the store. I didn't want to tell my manager about it because I couldn't really tell her that I went and smoked weed with him after my shift. I felt so sick from the whole thing, but it did not end there. Fast forward to the end of October. Joe had not made any more appearances. One Friday I had a closing shift that was only a couple of hours in the late afternoon. I had rolled on Molly for the first time the night before, and I was feeling fairly fragile, for lack of a better term. Literally moments after I had settled in, guess who came waltzing in? My heart dropped. I was in no place to deal with him right now, and had no idea what to do. I was so exhausted and out of it that I just didn't do anything. He stayed there for my entire shift, talking my ear off the whole time as I said nothing. And he even interacted with customers as if he worked there too. I wanted to cry the whole time. I felt powerless. I let him get this far and had no way of stopping him from acting this way. A part of me was legitimately afraid to simply ask him to leave. I think he knew this. I was counting the minutes till the end of my shift. When it finally arrived, I was ready to run out of there. He followed me out of the building. He followed me to my bus stop. The entire time talking and talking and talking, bragging about his musician friends and his artist friends and how much crazy fun they have at their raves. I would literally go 10 minutes without saying a word, and he wouldn't stop talking. I stood waiting for my bus, people all around us at the bus stop, and just wanted to cry. He asked which bus I was taking, and I felt I had no choice but to tell him because he'd see me getting on the bus anyway. He then casually mentioned that the bus I'd take goes past his friend's house. I prayed he wouldn't use that as an excuse to get on the bus with me, and frantically tried to think of a plan to stop that from happening. I texted my friend asking him to call me to pretend we were making plans. I spoke with him for a minute on the phone, then hung up and told Joe I was going to hang out with a bunch of my guy friends from high school, hoping that would deter him from following me further. It was another unbearable few minutes until my bus came, and I wanted to cry with relief when he didn't attempt to follow me on the bus. I ended up quitting the job for unrelated reasons, so I figured I would never see or hear from him again. He texted me a few weeks later, and I simply said, "Can you please stop talking to me?" He respectfully agreed, and I blocked his number as well as his Facebook. I was surprised at how easy it had been, but a few weeks later, I was at a museum with some friends that were visiting from out of town. We had a really great day and had just entered the gift shop when my friends decided to go use the restroom. I waited around in the gift shop, idly playing with some souvenir rocks, when I looked up and saw something that made me do a double take. My blood ran cold when my fears were confirmed. It was Joe, here in the gift shop, 5 feet away from me. He was with a child. His back was to me, so I ducked out of the gift shop and ran to the bathroom to tell my friends. I felt myself starting to get panicky. Just seeing him was beginning to become triggering for me. I couldn't believe he was here. We do not live in a very small city. The museum was in an entirely different part of the city where I had seen him before. I was terrified. I saw him walk out of the gift shop and continue walking in the opposite direction from us. I was sure he hadn't seen me. My friends and I went back in the gift shop to look around some more before leaving. The gift shop was a little bit crowded. I was looking at a display when I felt a hand on my shoulder and I thought it was one of my friends. I turned around to see that it was Joe. He was saying, "Excuse me," and I don't know if he meant it as an, "Can I have your attention or can I get by you?" But I felt as if I was going to throw up. We made eye contact and he smiled, and I bolted away through the crowd of people. I walked far away from the gift shop and waited for my friends to come back out, and we left quickly. I never saw Joe again after that. I hate thinking about it now because it gave me some serious anxiety to think what could have happened if I didn't have a bad feeling. If I had ever met up with him again, if I had decided to do more drugs with him, who knows what could have happened. It honestly chills me to this day just thinking about the fact that he may have been stalking me. If not, there were some insane coincidences that took place. So this is my story. I never heard from Joe again, and soon I moved out of that city. Joe, I hope we never ever meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 255. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. I'm sorry this video is a little bit later than usual. I had stuff to do today, and I'll have stuff to do again tomorrow. But I will have content out. They just, it's the upload times might be a bit inconsistent for the foreseeable future, but I'm going to do my best to make sure I get videos out on the daily. So, okay, with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.